Welcome to week one of the Breakroom. How many of you out there have streaming video service of some point? Hulu, Amazon Prime, Netflix? Yeah, almost all of you. At the Shanks house, we've got it too. We cut the plug several years ago, primarily because I'm a cheapskate. And we cut it, don't have satellite, we don't have cable, but what we've really come to enjoy is just no commercials. I don't know about you, but the fact that there's no commercials, you can go pick your own TV show, and you can go back to season 1, episode 1 in a show and get caught up on that. But what's happened is it's created this thing called binge watching a little bit, where somebody can get trapped and just be watching it from start to finish on that. And it's created a kind of a syndrome out there that the commercial just showed you, and that's called show hole. Now, I was kind of curious what show hole was, so I looked it up in the Urban Dictionary, and if you've got teenagers, you need to know this dictionary. So I looked it up, and the definition is this: when you finally finish binge watching all the episodes of a favorite TV series on Netflix, Hulu, or Amazon, and as the credits to the final episode roll, it's that empty feeling that wraps around your soul because you don't now know what to do with your life, like a good friend just left you forever. Now, after one woman watched the entire series of Lost, she was quoted saying this: "I think I cried 3 different times during the finale, and now I have a show hole where my heart used to be." That seems a bit absurd and extreme for me, but apparently this is really a thing out there. Apparently some people navigate and walk through this very real thing. The truth is, when we get involved in a show, we kind of get sucked into the plot. And as we start doing life with the characters on the show, we kind of get this sense like we're doing life alongside them, that we're part of what's going on, that they're actually friends, they're actually parts of our lives. And there's many shows out there that are based upon people just doing lives together. I mean, one, for instance, is Seinfeld. It's just a group of people doing lives. In fact, what's the main line in it? It's a show about nothing, right. Another one would be Friends, a show of people that are friends just doing life together. Some of those shows happen in the workplace, in office environments. In fact, one of the most popular ones is called exactly that, The Office. Another one might be Parks and Rec. Maybe you've got a favorite as well that comes to mind when we mention that. It may interest you a little bit that in those shows, as the writers are developing characters and plot lines and so forth, there's a little bit of a formula they use when developing sitcoms out there. Especially when they're developing characters, there's some formulas, what they call archetypes, that they use that you will often see in many different sitcoms. Well, I want to talk about a few of those today. One, so that you can maybe identify them when you watch TV from here on out, or maybe your favorite show, you'll say, oh, I kind of see that now a little bit on that. But even more importantly, you might find out that some of these characters exist in your life. They exist in your families, they exist in your workplace, they exist wherever you do life alongside other people. They're out there. And so I want to just discuss a little bit some of these formulaic archetypes that the writers use when developing a sitcom. The first one I want to talk about is the first character is called the logical one. This is usually the person on the show that has the highest level of common sense. They're usually the person that the show is centered around oftentimes, but they're kind of surrounded by lunatics, and they know it. And there's just a general sense, if you think of the character, that they spend a good chunk of their time going like this, and wondering who dropped me off in the land of crazy. But they're fun because they're sort of that outside perspective and voice of reason in the group that they exist in. Some of those people that fall into that category, for those of you who remember the show way back when, MASH, Colonel Potter would have been one of those people on the show. Another one, if you're into The Office like I am, Jim plays that role as that character in it. And then one of my favorite shows of all time is Mr. Hank Hill from King of the Hill, who sells propane and propane accessories. Amen to that. And so these are people that are just kind of like, they're that voice of reason that exists in the show. The next character I want to highlight is what we call the lovable loser. This is the person who is just a great person. They are usually very optimistic. They kind of look at the world through rose-colored glasses, and they're very likable and you love them, but for whatever reason, they just seem to land themselves in bad situations on a daily basis. Bad luck just seems to kind of follow them. Some of those people maybe you recognize from shows, from Friends. Ross would be one of those characters. Or from Seinfeld itself, George Costanza is one of those characters. Or if you watch The Simpsons, that is most certainly Homer Simpson, as you will find he fits in several of these categories. The next one I want to talk about is sometimes a little bit harder to identify, and that's the neurotic. This is the person oftentimes you will see that is highly intelligent, very smart. They've got a lot up here, but they don't have any people skills. They're the people that have a lot of brains and not of knowledge, but have zero common sense. Maybe if you remember, anybody here remember the Far Side cartoons when they were out? Am I the only one? Okay. The Far Side, they're great. One of the most famous Far Sides is one called Midvale School of the Gifted, and the door clearly says pull, and the kid is pushing against the door. Anybody remember that? It's one of those people who are just awkward in life, but very intelligent. Some of those include Sheldon from Big Bang Theory. People say I'm like him. I don't agree. Another would be Annie from Community. Or if you go a little further back, maybe you remember Niles Crane from the show Frasier was very much that way as well too. The next character we identify that you'll see from time to time is the buffoon. Now, it's real easy to just kind of come forward and say, this person's an idiot. But number one, that's just not a nice thing to call anybody. But number two, the buffoon is not usually as dumb as you think. Usually, really, what their problem is they're a little bit dim-witted and they're a lot lazy. And by lazy, I mean they tend to like to cut corners or find other ways of doing things rather than the actual way. And that's exactly what usually lands them in trouble. That's exactly what puts them where they are. Rather than doing something the right way, they like to take a shortcut or cut corners, and it makes for funny shows. Some of those people are Joey from Friends, Michael Scott from The Office, or maybe you remember a show way back when, Cheers, and you remember a character named Woody. And Woody was one of the bartenders, and he was not the sharpest knife in the drawer. But those would be some examples of some buffoons. The next person you'll often run across is the jerk. And it's exactly who they are. They are the jerk of the show. They don't care what they say. They don't care who they say it to. They have no filter. The really only person they care about is themselves. Everything sort of revolves around them. They're rebels. They typically have a God complex. They could care less about rules. They just don't apply to them. And they will do anything they want, and they plan to get away with it. These are the jerks in the show. Some of those people include Dr. Cox from the show Scrubs, or maybe you know Jeff Winger from Community, but probably the biggest one of them all is Dr. House from the show after him, which is House, is a quintessential jerk on the show. The next is called the player. And just as it sounds, I don't know any other way to say it than this, the player is all about sex. The player is after sex, and that's what they're going after on a constant basis. And the funny part is they're usually really bold, hilarious people to be around. They are the life of the party. You want to hang around with them if you're looking to just have some fun and get a good laugh. But what you find out about the player over time, or even pretty quickly, is that they seem absolutely incapable of having healthy long-term relationships with anybody. So they're just a player out in the field. Some of those people that come to mind is the Todd from Scrubs, and he's actually listed as the Todd in the credits on that. Another one, maybe you remember Michael Kelso, played by Ashton Kutcher in the 70s show. He would be one of those characters as well. But I think the player of the players in my book is Barney from How I Met Your Mother, Suit Up. And so love that show, and the players can be for great fun, but they seem emotionally incapable of having relationships. The last one I want to bring up is what we call the eccentric. Now, it could be real easy to mix up the eccentric with the buffoon. But the eccentric is different. Their problem isn't necessarily that they're dim-witted. Their problem is they're just on another planet. They're just on another page. They're just somewhere else. And what's funny is they're actually really connected. They're oftentimes very creative type people that just don't see the world from the same set of lens that we often see the world in. And that's what makes them particularly funny. Some of the people that come to mind on that is Phoebe from Friends. Perhaps my favorite would be Kramer from Seinfeld, and another would be the janitor from Scrubs. Any of these sound familiar? Maybe they bring to mind whatever favorite shows you enjoy. You kind of start recognizing some of these characters in that show and how they exist in the show that you watch too. And you'll be looking and paying attention to that, I bet, as you watch your shows here in the next couple days and so forth. But just like there's characters in the sitcoms that we watch, there are characters in our life as well too. Today, I want to talk a little bit about some of those characters that we will engage in our journey and how do we engage them, because it's important how we step into that relationship and how we navigate life together. But before we do that, I need to backpedal just a little bit and kind of set the stage for that conversation. A few years ago, as a pastor, I had a realization, kind of an aha light bulb moment in ministry. I realized one simple thing. I can't do everything. I can't do everything. Now, some of you are sitting out there going, well, duh, that's a pretty simple thing. Of course you can. But you know what? More people struggle with this than you realize, and a lot of leaders struggle with this because there's sort of this idea and a trap you can get into in leadership that has this subtle idea that if you want something done right, you need to do it yourself. If this thing's going to get done correctly, if it's going to be my way, if it's going to look the way I want it to look, sound the way it's going to sound, I just have to do it ourselves. But how many of you know that's a trap you can get in? And God was breaking me and he was challenging me because what he was revealing to me was this. Jason, if you're going to live the God-sized dreams that I'm calling you to live, if you're going to take the church where I'm taking the church, if you're going to be the people that I want you to be, you can't be the single source of information. You can't be the only person doing all the work. You can't be the only thing, the center of the universe in that organization, because here's why. If you're the only person making the decisions and if you're the only person doing the work, you are the lid. You are the ceiling in that organization. It will only be as good as you are. You can only take it as far as your abilities can go. You become the lid. You become the ceiling in that organization, and we're not called to do that. We're called to take the church where God needs it to go. We're called to harness the energy of the entire church, to realize that people are gifted and they have talents, and to bring those together and realize that God's going to use all of those talents and all of those gifts in a way to accomplish something bigger than anything you could ever imagine. And I had to have that aha moment. But as a leader, for those of you who are leaders or managers or have people around you, there's a very disturbing thought that comes with that you have to be okay with. And that is this. You have to be okay with those people that you hand off leadership to doing something about 80% of the way you would. Do you hear me on that? You have to be okay with them doing it only about 80% the way you would. It is not fair for you to impose your ideas on how you work and how you accomplish things. It's not fair for you to take the things that work for you and impose that on someone else, because the reality is God uniquely gifts each person with a different set of talents and gifts. And if you impose your way of doing things on them, they will fail because they are their own person. Now, I am not saying you lower the bar of leadership, and I am not saying that you don't have the same expectations for production and what you accomplish. What I am saying is don't impose your value system that you put on yourself on someone else. You have to be careful about that. And by the way, this isn't just in the workplace. Parents, you got to be really careful about this one, because one of the things we try to do is we get this idea, I just need to make this person more like me. I just need to have the same expectations on my child that I put on myself, and I need to impose that expectation on the child, rather than realizing that God makes every person unique and different. He gives them different gifts and different talents, and you have to approach each child differently. You have to approach each relationship differently. You cannot put the same expectations you put on yourself onto somebody else. You cannot project that. You will fail. And we have to be really careful about that when we lead people out in the marketplace and when we lead people at church. Now, there's another character in the Bible who came to the very same conclusion I did. This idea that I can't do everything. We actually talked about him last week, and we're going to talk about him again this week. It's Moses. Last week, Moses was instructed by God at the burning bush to go down to Egypt and tell Pharaoh to let God's people go. When we pick up the story this week, through God's mighty hand, he has brought the Egyptians out of Egypt in slavery, and they are now in the wilderness. The story that we're going to pick up is going to be in Exodus chapter 18. So if you have your electronic device or your Bible, I encourage you to turn there. We're going to put it on the screens, the verses. They're in your worship guide as well. Whatever you are comfortable with following along, I encourage you to. And just let us know if there's anything we can help you with on that. As we pick up the story, Moses' father-in-law comes to visit him. The very next day, Moses goes out to the people of Israel, and he sits down and he begins to hear and try all the cases, all the disputes, all the arbitration that is going on with the people. He is the one person as judge over all the people. And they're bringing him their cares and their worries and their disputes all day long. We pick up the verse in verse 17 of Exodus 18. Moses' father-in-law replies to him. He says, "What you are doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone." Notice his father doesn't go, "Hey, great job, Moses. You're like the top dog. You're the grand poobah, man. Everything. You make all the decisions. The people are listening to your every word, expecting, and you're the man." He doesn't say that. He looks at him and he says, "What you're doing is wrong. You can't keep this pace up. You can't keep working this way. You're going to wear yourself out. You're going to burn out. You can't keep doing this." Here's what he says next to him in verse 19. He says, "Listen now to me, and I will give you some advice, and may God be with you. You must be the people's representative before God and bring their disputes to him. Teach them his decrees and instructions, and show them the way they are to live and how they are to behave." He goes on to tell them in the next few verses, you need to go appoint judges. You need to appoint judges and layers of judges in each of the tribes, and they are to be the ones who try the cases. And if there's a case that comes up that you're having trouble dealing with that's more difficult, then you may bring that case up to me. But Moses is not to be trying every single case in Israel. Because you may or may not know, the Bible records in several places that when they left Egypt, it was over 600,000 men, which means it was about 1.2 million people that he was the lone judge in. There's no way he could do that all. He's going to have to find people, train them, and teach them the decrees, it says. Jim Collins talked about this a little bit in his book, Good to Great, where he said this. He said, "Start by getting the right people on the bus, the wrong people off the bus, and the right people in the right seats." It's true of any organization or any endeavor that you walk into as a leader. The shortened way to say that is get the right people doing the right things. Find the right people and make sure they're doing the right things if you're going to move forward in this endeavor. Why do we do that? Why is that important? Well, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, answers us in Exodus 18:22. He says, "That will make your load lighter because they will share it with you." If you're going to take this time to invest in other people and teach them and build leaders, we'll see two leadership principles come out of that. The first one is this: leadership is sharing the workload. Instead of having this idea, hey, if you want it done right, you do it yourself, or I'm going to do it all, or I'm going to be the single source, you have to share the workload with other people. You're going to have to harness the energy of the people around you. You're going to have to do the hard work of developing them and training them to do the work that is ahead, equipping and resourcing them. The second thing we have to remember about leadership is this: it's influencing others to accomplish more than we could ever do alone. Great leaders who develop other leaders influence other people to accomplish things they never think they could, just like a good coach in sports who's always looking at the players and saying, "You are capable of more. I'm going to raise the bar. I'm going to challenge you, and I'm going to make you better." A good leader helps their developing leaders understand that they are capable of way more than they think they are. A great parent helps their kids understand you are capable way more than you think you are. That's what leaders do, but there's a problem that occurs when we start developing other leaders, when we start sharing the workload, when we decide we're going to influence other people. A big problem arises because, see, when you have that posture that says, I'm just going to do it all myself, you don't have to worry about relationships. The only person you need to get along with at that point is yourself. And I can't help you if you can't get along with yourself. But when you start to empower other people, and when you start to influence them, and when you start to share the work, you are now engaged in relationships. You are now having to do life alongside other people. You now have to embrace their uniqueness. You now have to be okay with some of their idiosyncrasies. You now have to realize, like we talked about earlier, they may not do things the same way you do it. They may approach it from a different way. They may see it a little bit differently. You begin doing life alongside a group of characters, and like the TV shows and the sitcoms that we were talking about, there's different characters in your story, isn't there? Just as there's different characters in the sitcoms, there will be different characters in your life as well too. We're going to talk about a few of those here in just a moment. And I encourage you to follow along because these are really important and have been enormously valuable in my ministry career to understand and identify these people, because helping to identify and understand them helps you navigate the long distance race that you're being called to as a leader. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about church. It doesn't matter if we're talking about your office place. It doesn't even matter if we're talking about your home. These people exist in all those arenas of your life. Many years ago, an author named Gordon MacDonald wrote a book called Restoring Your Spiritual Passion. It's been an excellent book in ministry to help understand things, and I encourage you to pick up and read it. In that book, he identifies 5 types of people that he comes across on a normal basis. I want to discuss with you those 5 groups of people today. And while we're doing that, be asking yourself, who are some of these people in my life? Where are they in my life? The very first group of people I want to identify are what I call the VRPs. These are very resourceful people. This is the handful or less in your life. You don't get a lot of these in your life. These are the people who are older, wiser. They've been there. They've done that. They are your mentors. They are your teachers. These are the people that you learn from. And you have to have these people in your life, because if you're going to be leading others and teaching others, the question does inevitably come up, well, who's teaching you? Who's holding you accountable? Who are you learning from? Because you are always a student. You never stop being a student in life. You're always learning, you're always growing, you're always moving forward. But who is your mentor? Who is teaching you? They're very resourceful people, and they're very important to your life. The second group are called VIPs, and just as the name implies, they're very important people. These are the people in your life that share the vision and the passion. They are your coworkers that are close to you. They are your inner circle at your job. They are the people who ask the tough questions. They challenge you. They do it in a loving way, but they know the work that needs to be done, and they're going to do it. They do not spend a lot of time sitting around going, how are your feelings? How are my feelings? How can we better get along? No, these are the group of people that know the work that needs to be done. They know the vision, they know the mission, and they just are going to get it done. They're the people working around you. They're the production machine around you that are working alongside you. These are very important people in your life, and you need them. The third group are what we call VDP or VTPs. These are very trainable people. This is the next generation. This is your pipeline. If you're a leader, one of our jobs as leaders is to identify future leaders, to go out there and find those people who are going to carry the torch after us. It is our job to develop them. It is our job to train them, to resource and equip them. That is why, for instance, here at Radiant Church, we say that kids are a big deal because we believe one of our primary jobs here is to raise up the next generation that's going to carry the baton, climb the hill, and get it done. It's our job to identify them. It's our job to equip and to resource them. And it's our job to find leaders now, people in the church, people like you who are out there that are going to say, what's it going to be to raise the bar, to step up and to step into leadership? It's our job to help identify you and you identify yourself so that we can begin resourcing and equipping you. We need to be able to put you in positions where you can succeed. But even more so here at Radiant Church, we have said you can be in a position where you fail as well too. That if we're going to be the church that God's calling us to, real leaders succeed, but they sometimes fail too. How many of you have learned more sometimes from your failures than what you did right? I have. And so we're going to be the sort of place that says, listen, we're not pursuing failure, but we realize that real good leaders fail. In fact, the only real failure out there is failure to try. We refuse to allow that. But real leaders try, and they don't always get everything right. And the real leadership moment for a leader isn't always what they get right. The true leadership moment is, I didn't get this one right, what's next? It's getting up, it's wiping off the dust, and it's trying again. Good leaders try again. They try a different way. They do different things. They just don't make the same mistake twice. That's poor leadership. We have to have very trainable people in our lives so that we have that pipeline for future leadership to carry the torch when we move on. The next group of people, as we kind of turn a corner a little bit now, are what I call VNPs. These are very nice people. Very nice people. And the world's full of very nice people. VNPs love our passion. They enjoy our vision. But here's the difference. They don't want to do any of the work. They're very nice people, and they have a tendency to kind of pat you on the back and say, oh, great job. I love you. Man, I love what y'all are doing. That's really terrific. But the minute you go, hey, well, that's awesome. I'm glad you love it and everything, but, I'd love for you to step up and maybe help in this way. They are like the best magicians I've ever seen. They just disappear, and you don't know where they go. They're nice people. As Gordon MacDonald wrote and noted in the book, he said, we must not confuse their kindness with their commitment in that. And what you end up realizing is the very nice people in your life, whether that's at work or church or at home, oftentimes they enjoy sharing their opinion, but they don't necessarily want to give their time. And there's a big difference between those two. The last one are the VDPs, and I want to camp out on this one for a couple minutes. The VDPs are very draining people. Very draining people. These are the people in our lives that sap our passion. They take it away. They will suck you dry, constantly draining you, constantly demanding of you. Oftentimes they know the right answers. Oftentimes they know the things to do. But for whatever reason in their life, they refuse to change. And they continue on a pattern. And they have this way of elbowing their way into groups. They have this way of elbowing their way into influence and trying to speak into things they shouldn't speak into. And they have no understanding of what they're doing or why. But VDPs exist. And maybe you're thinking of one in your life right now. Very draining people exist in our lives. Here's some things you need to know if you're taking notes today about VDPs in your life. The first one is this. VDPs do not know they are VDPs. They don't. VDPs don't know that they are VDPs. And they will never self-actualize. They will never come to that conclusion, most likely. It's just a pattern of behavior they have. Sometimes they do, but often they don't. Here's the second thing you need to know about VDPs. VDPs are attracted to a healthy group and a healthy organization like a mosquito is attracted to blood. They seek it out. They seek it out, and they don't necessarily know why. But there's just a general sense there's a hole or something missing inside of them. And when they see a healthy group of people or they see a healthy organization, they know that that has something they don't. And so they seek it out. The third thing and last thing you need to know about VDPs is this. A healthy group of people can lose their momentum and their vibrancy if the VDP begins to monopolize its time and attention. This is important for group leaders out there. This is important for managers. This is important for leaders. This is important in family life as well, in friendships. Wherever it may be you have relationships, you have to be careful about the VDPs in your life. And listen, I realize something, and there's a difference here. All of us have seasons in our lives where we march through difficult times. Even Jesus said, in this world you will find trouble. We all have those seasons. And as a church, it is our desire and our commitment to walk through those times with you and help guide you through it and be there for you. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is this. There is a difference between I have a need and I am a needy person. Do you see the difference? I have a need or I am a needy person. I am that person that the dark cloud just seems to follow everywhere I go. And the life of needy people is often just marked by drama. Anyone in your life, it just seems like their life is one constant drama. And you know what the problem with the drama is? It sucks you in eventually if you're not careful. You get sucked in like the show hole. But you don't want to get sucked into that show. Trust me. Because they will sap you of your energy. They will sap you of your passion. You have to be careful about VDPs. And they very often need healthy boundaries around them. And as leaders, sometimes we have to do the hard work of defining what those boundaries are. Do you have any VDPs in your life? Which gets us to our so what moment. Oftentimes I'll walk into a room and I'll ask different people, hey, are you in leadership? And it seems like most people look at me and go, no, I'm not really in leadership and so forth. But here's what I want to challenge you. Since we know leadership is about influencing, and since we know leadership is about sharing, I bet every single person in this room is a leader at some point. All of us, anytime we are engaged in influencing someone else or sharing in the workload, we're engaged in leadership. Parents, one of our primary jobs is to influence our children. We're engaged in leadership. We engage in leadership in many different ways in our lives, and all of us engage in leadership moments at some time. And because we're all engaged in leadership, there's one big question that we need to be asking ourselves in the coming week, and that question is this. Who receives our time and attention, and how much? Who receives our time and our attention, and how much? And man, I get it. I live it. It is very difficult to look at someone and say, I just can't meet with you right now. I can't make that appointment. I can't do that thing. I can't resource you with what you're asking. I don't have it to give. It's hard. And the person you're telling it to, especially if they're a VDP, may never understand it. And they will not understand if you have to put healthy boundaries around them. But as leaders, we're called to do what is right. Please hear me, though. Please. People are important and people matter. We are called to love everybody as Jesus Christ loves us. That's not what I'm talking about here. Yes, people matter, but your time matters too. They're not making any more of it. You only have so much in a day, in a week, in a year. And the Bible says everything we have belongs to God. Therefore, everything is His. including our time. It is a gift given to us by God in stewardship, which means one day we will give an account to the Master of how we use our time and our resources. I'm not challenging you to ignore or belittle somebody or be mean. What I'm trying to say is, are you being a good steward with your time? Who gets your time and who gets your energy? Is it the VDPs? Or do you need to be pouring into those future leaders? Do you need to be equipping and resourcing those very important people so that you reach your goals and objectives? Who are you pouring into in life? Be kind. Be compassionate to the people around you. Love them. But be good stewards with your time. And my dear friends, as you invite people into leadership, be careful who you invite into leadership. Understand who they are. And protect the sanctity of your inner circle by doing the right things with your time and your energy.